You can keep on running out for days, and you call anyway. We can overcome this carnal sea, backwards and crooked like you need. Unshouted, unsown, beyond the place I go. The Lord never knows in the time I have grown. Backwards and corner cobblestone. Just like a soldier, one dead wounded cop. I'll never soldier, I'll always be forgot. I don't know what I know. Unshouted, unsown. Shalom, shalom. Hello, hello. I am Keats Ross. This is the PRAGMAGICK liminal stream. I'm here today with dear friend from down under, Mr. Jeremy Francis of the Alchemical Arts. And I just wanted to say a couple of things before we start tonight. Jeremy Francis is a true alchemist, whether it's casting his own talisman out of metals, forging his own color pigments out of dubious elements, or waxing on about traditionalist methods only found in 18th century tomes. The Alchemical Arts is a brilliant artist and modern color man. So please welcome Mr. Jeremy Francis. How are you, Jeremy?
I'm good. It's good to be back here with you.
Yeah, it's a long time. Oh, actually,
yeah, it's
maybe
been
not too long, huh?
it's about a year. Was
Yeah.
it? I'd say it was a very different world a year ago.
I was gonna say, I remember last
Yeah.
talking to you. I knew exactly where I was. I was in Portland at my last spot. I remember the night. I remember, yeah. It's funny how much has changed, and it feels like it's only been, a year.
Yeah, I was super early days in everything I was doing back then, and I was still in Melbourne in the city and just sort of cramped up in a little attic space there. Yeah, it was really, really fascinating thinking back how much has progressed over the last year or so in terms of like my working practice, but also my attitude to working as well, given just the insanity of this last 12 months as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think, that's why it was so prescient, I think, for me to talk to you now, because I think, when we use the term alchemy, it's used very loosely, and tonight we'll probably use it quite loosely. But you are, in the truest sense of the word, an alchemist. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe the literal interpretation of what I'm meaning.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the word literal, because I think part of something I've noticed in terms of, so I think when we spoke last time, I would have been pretty deep into reading a bunch of the old alchemical literature, as well as like I drew a lot from Jung's writings on alchemy and James Hillman and the way he looked at alchemy and sort of the relationship between psycho-spiritual and psychological models of alchemy, and how I could apply that thinking to sort of my practice of color making and that sort of stuff. Whereas where I'm at now, I've kind of pushed a lot of that theoretical stuff to the side, and the main important process that I follow is just observation. And it's slowly becoming apparent as there's a real difference between like learning to make a particular pigment from some old book, and the first few times you're like really carefully following the recipe and all of this sort of stuff, and you kind of get results you're happy with, and then you don't get results you're happy with. But as you do it over and over and over and over again, there's some pigments where I've made 20, 30 batches, and I'm at this point now where it becomes this kind of exercise in mindfulness when I sit down to make the pigment, where I'm no longer thinking about, oh, do I need to add 15 grams of this and heat it to this temperature? It's just like feeling my way through it and observing as the changes in the material happen, and knowing that if I tweak this thing, I'll get this result, or knowing, and it's like, it's a really nice feeling to get to that point where you know a material or a substance well enough that you can intuitively manipulate it.
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna say that's absolutely interesting, because I think when we had talked last, you were very much in the formulation of, there needs to be kind of a theoretical foundation, and this was you exploring that side and like really getting to the nitty gritty of old alchemical texts. And we've talked a little bit about more of the metaphorical alchemical like process that happens in creativity and what you make. And you're a musician, you're a painter, right? You do a lot of art. And so now it's like, I thought we could take this time and talk about, and it sounds like you're parallel to that. You're going through the process of feeling that kind of inner alchemy, or that transitory state within, creation.
Yeah, and it became something that I observed through looking at the sort of, the subreddits of alchemy, or like people's Facebook groups of alchemy and stuff. And there's this like real drive to literalism, which is like, you get all of these people being like, how to make philosopher's stone, need to know, want to gain immortality. Please give recipe now. And it's like, I think that's part of the problem of where our society is at, is we view so much of everything in a literal sense that we forget the sort of counteracting balance to that, to literalism, which is imagination. And so I think early on I was very obsessed with trying to build this bridge, or this marriage, between the classical alchemical literature, psychology, metaphysics, and the physical process I was doing. Whereas as time's gone on, the thing that's most important is actually just doing it.
Right. Do you feel like there's like a transmutation too of like conceptualizing, right? Like you're talking about, you're just trying, you're going by feel, you get to know something so well that it's really just like an expression of, how to change it, rather than, a goal so much.
Yeah. It's about what's in the materials themselves and how they relate. And it's about how there is both precision and unexpected results at the same time. And so it's like, one of the things I do is I go and I search through like sort of contemporary journal articles for like modern advancements in pigment making. And I'll find some paper from like a Chinese university on like this particular color they make. And I go and recreate that experiment, dot for dot, exactly the same. And yet I yield a completely different result.
Oh, interesting.
And I think this is a very common thing in science at the moment, is like this whole idea of the reproducibility of science is actually deeply flawed. And so a vast amount of the scientific literature can't actually be reproduced, and you don't get the same results.
Do you,
And
yeah. I was gonna say, do you think there's a confluence too about like absolutism, you know?
yes,
And yeah,
and I think science is starting to realize and catch up, and they've, this is all in quantum stuff and things like that, that the intention of the experimenter is put into the experiment
right. And
and
that's what
has an effect on it. And that's where things start to come back to the classical alchemy, which is in classical alchemy, a lot of what they were doing in terms of working with elements and real material is there is a literalism in the materials they're working with, lead and sulfur and mercury. They are literally working with those things, but they also had either a conscious and an unconscious understanding that they were projecting themselves into it,
mm-hmm.
and it was projecting back into them. And
Yeah, it's
so,
will made manifest in a way. It's
yeah,
also
exactly.
yeah, like a psychical interference too from personality, or just maybe how you pinch a pigment, like how you caress a material in your hands as opposed to somebody else. It's some weird kinetic thing.
Yeah, and there's a patience and a reverence to the changes that are happening. So I've been doing a huge amount of work with copper at the moment. I've just done a deep dive into copper for some strange reason. And, classically, copper is considered the metal of Venus.
Right.
And it's just a really interesting thing that happens with copper is you end up with these pigments that are very, very beautiful, but very fragile and very prone to falling apart and degrading and becoming a complete and utter mess.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really interesting sort of watching the shifts and changes that go on with different copper materials. You see how copper oxidizes out in the
Oh
world
yeah,
and
I
lots of
remember
stuff.
famously seeing the Andy Warhol painting that Lou Reed pissed on.
Yep.
That he did the copper painting and he had people at the factory pee on it and just
Yep.
he would hang it up on the walls that oxidized with their urine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's
Yeah.
it's really cool. And then so while I've been sort of working with that, because it's not an immediate response to make a lot of these pigments, they take weeks of like digesting and sitting and changing and doing all of these things, that it requires so much time spent just looking
Mm.
and sort of contemplating and just watching the changes happen, that one, it's given me a huge respect to copper, but two, it's also given me this really interesting insight to try and think, well, why did ancient cultures conflate the ideas of the goddess of love and Venus with this metal? Like, what is it about this metal that's somehow representative of her?
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is, yeah, it's just a really fascinating sort of thing to try and figure out, because at some point people saw a correlation between the two.
What's your understanding? Is it the fragility of it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think you get something. I mean, I think there's a nice parallel between, the beauty of the tones that are produced, but the unstable nature of them. And if you're referring that back to the goddess and the epitome of love, then there is definitely some parallels between the nature of love being both beautiful but fairly unstable.
Right. Yeah, very fragile. Yeah.
Yeah.
Navier in the chat mentioned that Aphrodite was born on Cyprus and the island is made of copper, so that's a pretty direct correlation,
Yep.
I
And I think
assume.
it's also like the sea green elements of the
Oh
whole
yeah.
Aphrodite myth being born from Kronos' genitals in the ocean. Um, I have this here, I'll show you. So this is a piece of copper that's been in a chamber with vinegar.
Oh,
That's,
beautiful.
yeah, it's just these little blue illustrious crystals.
I love that blue.
Yeah, so nice.
You have a couple of pigments that really like shout at me, like that seem like I know how you've made them so organically that seems so otherworldly, you know.
That's the other thing that I've really enjoyed too, is the learning to be like respectful and reverent of very complex and dangerous poisons, basically.
Yeah.
And learning to respect using them is a really interesting thing. So it's like my attitude to, say, making an ochre pigment from the earth, where I go out and collect, because Australia's got amazing ochre, and we go out and collect all these earth pigments. That's something I'm willing to get my hands into and like
Hmm.
be very, very tactile with. And there's a certain the attitude that I bring to dealing with an earth pigment is very different to the attitude I'll bring to making something with lead or chromium or
Yeah.
these sorts of things. And it also means that the color itself has a different attitude to it, because it's like the level of care and respect needed to produce something that's going to give off some sort of really toxic gas or something like that.
Right.
You have to be very, very careful with that. And so you have a completely different attitude to the final product and
Hmm.
feeling towards that color, as opposed to something that you can really get your hands into.
Yeah, last time
um,
we talked, you made a Mercury Talisman,
no, that was a lead talisman.
lead
Yeah,
talisman, that's right, of Saturn. And yeah, you were talking about just the toxicity of, what you're working with, and
I still have him.
you still have it. Yeah,
He's
awesome.
degrading. He's
Oh
become
wow.
white.
It's even
He's
more
in his
pretty.
age. In
Yeah.
his age, he whitens.
We talked about that too, and just that
Yeah,
almost the alchemy of color, And I always love that part of our discussion. And that seems to be like oxidizing in a reverse or like an absolute way where it becomes
yeah,
white. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, if it's Saturn, it's the old man, and he's degrading
Hmm.
into his age. Um, but that's the other thing too. There's this like feeling with each pigment where, like, depending on what they're made of, some literally have more weight to them, and some are very light, and so you get these differences in the qualities and the working properties of them. And it's something that we don't get in modern pigment chemistry. A lot of synthetic colors that have been produced in the last 70, 80 years, they're uniform, they're the same weight, and they're all very strong.
Oh wow. Yeah, I
Um,
was gonna say, like, how did you like parallel? Did you continue working? I know you had a background, you dabbled, in kind of how do I put this, metaphysical practice, whatever. Have you found that this was the perfect confluence, or did you actually do some stuff, parallel as you were working through this stuff?
as in, like, have I had a sort of separate sort of metaphysical practice
Yeah,
alongside
like
of this?
as it's growing with your, creations.
Not really.
Hmm.
Of late, I really think, as I said, like the last year has mostly been about being in the work. And I find, like, from of all of my sort of day-to-day activities, the only time where I feel completely centered is when I'm making pigments. There's
Right.
this like complete, like, it's become my practice, in the sense that, like,
Yeah,
I'm
that's what I
getting,
assumed. Yeah.
yeah, I'm getting to the stage where I don't have to think when I do it, and I don't have to. Um, it's an emptying out and just a taking in. So it's allowing me to sort of center myself and then just observe. And
Well, yeah, you mentioned the word mindfulness, and
mm,
even in my creative aspects, yeah, it's like it's that runner's high in a way of, that absolute bliss of just the process. And
mm,
like that's what I think what every creator craves. And so my next question is, how does one, because we both do it in different avenues and stuff, but you've seemed to have grown a business too. You've seemed to parlay this kind of practice into something that's actually really cool and entrepreneurial. And I was thinking, like, where did that kind of move in? How did you start to see that other people would kind of, I don't know, would buy it,
But it was mostly driven from a necessity of um, I couldn't, because I've worked in hospitality for close to a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the best hospitality position I'd ever been in my life, where I was working for a family friend's business where we made beautiful vegetarian food, and they had been making their own tofu there for 38 years. This place had
Mm-hmm.
been open. One of my best friends was my manager. His dad was the owner. And as wonderful as everything was there, like, it was a really kooky and eccentric place to work. Like, I'd rock up sometimes and, because the dad is an ex baby boomer hippie, he'd be sitting out the front with a beer, still coming down from an LSD trip. And you'd be like, this is a Tuesday. You need to be at work. He'd be like, no,
Yeah.
man, like, this is good. And despite all of that, I just couldn't take it anymore. I just couldn't take serving customers. My patience was running thin, and I just thought, no, I really need to do something else. And that's where this sort of difficult endeavor of balancing this sort of personal, passionate project I'm working on and trying to engage in the entrepreneurial elements that
Mm-hmm.
are necessary in order to make money, which is a
Yeah.
real shame.
I mean, it's a shame, but at the same time, it deserves reward. Like,
Of
you know what
course.
I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I struggled with that as my own criticism for my own self and my own creative endeavors, but it's one that I'm undergoing an inner alchemy of, like, I need to, let go and, you know, not expect, but promote a little bit more, or you know what I mean? Maybe promote's not the right word, but say, hey, you can have this for free, or you can it's just such a tricky subject for me. And
It
I
is
think with
because,
yours, you're actually giving something for people to use to create their own, rather than, you know what I mean? Like them, you buying something kind of like an album, or
yeah.
any other piece of art. It's like you're actually giving them an elemental base tool to create something beautiful, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, well, it became a thing of where I felt like my art was to provide materials for other artists. I
Yeah.
I had become disillusioned with my own art making process, and I find painting to be a very enjoyable but laborious struggle, which
Hmm.
I'm sure many painters relate to that particular um, experience, and it's not unique. But it was more fitting, or it felt more comfortable for me to make for other artists. Um,
Yeah.
the difficulty that I'm having at the moment, and this relates to what we were just talking about, or I was about to go on about, in terms of the relationship between modern art materials and archaic art materials, is trying to figure out how to sell that, in the sense that for most people, if you walk into an art store nowadays, you'll be confronted with a wall of, like, anywhere between like 70 to 150 different colors that you can, purchase from. If you think about even just like going to pick out house paint, just think about the innumerable amounts of little test cards that you can get of every possible color ever
Yeah.
is available. And that's not always been the case, like, and we take it for granted, I think. I don't know if we talked about this last time, but in modern society, like, to go and have a purple t-shirt is just something we take for granted. You can just go
Right.
and buy a purple t-shirt. If you were to go back to ancient Rome and you wanted a purple t-shirt, it would cost you the lives of 150,000 sea critters,
Yeah.
just to produce enough dye to dye one garment purple.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
Which meant that only emperors had purple clothes, which
Mm-hmm.
meant that
That's very regal color. Yeah.
there's this deep association between regalness and purple.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it wasn't until, I think it was the late 19th century when they synthesized the purple dye and were able to make it from like a crude oil derivative. And that's when the London had the purple craze, where Oscar Wilde and everybody was suddenly dressing in purple clothing, and the whole society went purple, and it was just wild. And
I love it.
just
One of my
because
favorites.
everybody could have purple.
Right.
Yeah,
It's unleashing a color to the world. It's insane.
exactly.
Like,
That
yeah.
was previously reserved for only certain people in society because it was so scarce and so difficult to make. And so I think there's this, and I don't want to be too denigrating on contemporary art because people can do some amazing things with the modern tools and there's great elements to the convenience, but you kind of have your pick of the lot when you go to buy paints nowadays. You can have any color you want.
Mm.
You can have it in any cost you want. You know, you can find a cheap version or an expensive version. You can have whatever you want. And they're all predictable. They
Mm-hmm.
all have the same working qualities. They all have similar optical effects. And so the variance and individuality that the ancient colors would have had right up until about the 19th century, where artists would have to labor through their materials
Yeah.
because not everything worked the same. Some things were coarser or changed color or unstable or couldn't be mixed with this thing or were too expensive.
Yeah.
Um,
It's insane to me. It's almost like color should be a right, but then at the same time, it has been, so it's been taken granted, taken for granted. So it's not as egalitarian.
well,
But
and I think the beauty of what the ancient system did was it meant that colors had significance because they had to is not the right way, but they were used in specific circumstances. You
yeah.
know, like because blues have historically been so expensive and so difficult to produce, they were for a vast portion of history reserved only for the mother of Jesus.
Right.
It was the only
Yeah.
time you could use blue, which is why Impressionism was so radical and Picasso's blue period, they were so radical departures from the past because it suddenly everyone was free to use blue because there were more blues available.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really wonder how this is the thing that I'm trying to figure out is how do I convey this to people that you didn't always have a smorgasbord of color
Mm-hmm.
and there
Or
is
a
actually
person hired to color match. You
yes,
know.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's a difficult thing trying to emphasize this point of like why is it actually beneficial or useful to have more difficult art materials to work with.
Yeah.
What do you gain from that process? Is it even worth it? You know.
I
Um,
mean, speaking as a creator, we talked a little bit about this last time too. It's worth it all to me. Every elemental aspect of anything, using to create, I think is absolutely worthwhile, and that's kind of where my fun and alchemy in the process comes from, as I'm sure it does for you, obviously. But to get to the foundational elements, to get to those elemental bases of you know of just color, of yeah, it's just it to me, it's just it sings to a part of the soul that I think is like you said, it's been uh taken for granted, or it's been hushed a bit. And yeah, we don't really look around, and I've got poor eyesight. I love color.
the theorizing of color has been relegated to advertising campaigns
Right.
and
Yeah.
interior design.
Yeah,
It's
there's all the semiotics too of color, and yeah, there's I'm a huge fan of color schemes, as you can see with
yeah.
the Austin Osmo Spare sigil behind me or whatever, or the We the Hollowed site. Like I'm very color based with projects and everything. It's always denoted a certain like oeuvre or ideology to a certain aspect of work, and using like electric colors or pastel types for certain things. They denote psychical resonance.
Hmm. I just gotten into making pastels, like
Oh yeah.
pastel colors lately, because I kind of had a realization that some of my earlier color releases and sets that I was sort of selling were too much a personal preference. They were too much rooted in the deeper muted tones of the Renaissance or the Baroque period, like velvety reds and earth tones and,
Mm-hmm.
these deep blues and things like that. And I was like, that's what I like. But I also realized there's a huge number of people out there that like, vintage mint greens and,
Right. And
bright yellows and
I say pastels, and everyone is going to have a different avenue of thought of what those look like. I'm sure
yeah,
as people are thinking Easter, or people are
yeah,
thinking, some other. It's so funny, just like the psychical resonance that comes up, and its connection to memory, and it's a sense. It's like color is a sense, you know.
yes.
Yeah. I had so Oswald Spangler in the chat wanted me to ask you about Austin Osman's Spare. I don't know exactly what he wanted to know, but I'm sure it has something to do, with him being an how do I put this? Like an inherently alchemical artist. Not so much a, you know, in the literal foundation, but is there anyone in that kind of era of people that have really inspired you? You've talked about Jung before. Yeah. Same
Theoretically,
era, but
yeah, Jung and those people I find very inspiring to reading their works on like the psychological alchemy and stuff and seeing how that
hmm
relates to artists and stuff like that. But most of my art appreciation and most of my influence and the reason I think I ended up in this place is just a really, really deep fascination with the art and processes of the medieval and Renaissance through the Baroque period. So,
nice.
I grew up being really obsessed with Rembrandt and like Goya and Caravaggio and all of these classical European painters.
hmm
And when I got to art school, that was just so not cool. That was
Right.
so just considered like stuffy academic old stuff. But it's like when you sit down and you look at those paintings or you go to Europe and you see those classical Renaissance paintings, they are incredibly powerful pieces of art. Um, and just the sheer craftsmanship and work that went into them and the working principles of like, if you were a young student in Renaissance Italy, you would be tasked with sitting in the squares and drawing the statues for a few years before you
Right.
could do anything else.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sitting
Just,
in in like the Pioneer Square. Yeah.
yeah. And then you were tasked with, the duty of being the painter's assistant where you ground his colors every morning for him
hmm
to do that kind of thing. Or, and then you might work your way up to being the person who does a little bit in the background. And I just think this idea of really deep level of training.
Yeah. It's more, and it's training by doing. This isn't,
Yes.
like in a sense that postmodernist thought of, over intellectualizing the entire thing before you actually practice. It's like they're learning every element, getting used to everything, working up, and even the most like mundane, small amounts. But yeah, what comes out is a lavish brilliance of, confluence of foundational training, theoretical training, and their imagination.
Well,
So
that's the thing. Rules and limitations on some of your process and dedication to honing your skills doesn't diminish the freedom of creativity.
right.
I think there's this big emphasis that I got put upon me when I was in art school, of essentially, as long as you can intellectually justify what you're doing, you can just basically go, bam, I'm an artist. bam, I
Yeah.
made art. And it's like,
Guilty.
sure, maybe,
I'm
you know,
guilty.
and
Yes.
like maybe the odd person has that ability to explode art out of them without any vocational training,
Hmm.
but they're very rare, I would say.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of people who think they can get away with making art because you can say that anything is art often fall into the less interesting category,
Right. That's a good
which
way
I
to
know
put
is
it.
extremely judgmental of me, but that's, I don't know. I feel
No,
like
I
we
mean
need to have,
you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think, this day and age when yeah, I'm with you that it's rare. I think for mine in that aspect of I always like just created, but at the same time it's how I learned. If I like
exactly,
say
yeah.
with music, if there was a trumpet line in my head in a song, I'd learn how to compose a trumpet, or in those situations. So it was kind of learning by doing, but there are people that I mean that's this day and age. It's the age of convenience, right? It's the age of laxability. So, people can claim all they want with a few clicks of a button, and that's just what it is. Like
And
you can tell.
the desire for instant success.
And you can tell. It's
Yeah.
it's pretty uncanny. You can absolutely tell. Mary had a really good question, um, and I wanted to ask this too. Is there anyone like? Do you find a particular type of artist that is drawn to the alchemical arts that like purchase from you to create?
At the moment, the majority of my customers are retired people from upstate New York.
I love it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Is that like Alex Gray and like his little
I have no
audience?
idea. I get a lot of people from Florida buying it too. I think it's just people who have money and
So
are
let's
interested.
let's talk about that transition into kind of I wouldn't say mass producing. How would you put it? Producing,
Scaling up.
scaling up, yeah. Or like by order. Um because you are I think initially you were very much like a certain pigment centered focus. Like
Yes.
you would create something and then you'd say, hey, maybe this is available or blah blah blah. But now it seems like you have a spread.
Yeah, I'm trying to build a range of colors that I like, and I think other people would like, but each one of them harks back to something interesting, or has interesting development kind of to it. So, like on the Earth's tones and the Earth pigment side of things, that's based on what I could find. I'm like driving along, because my partner and I go for little like just drives. Ever since we moved to the country here, there's just
Hmm.
so much to explore, and I'll just be like, there's a really interesting like patch of red ochre, and just like mark it on the map, and then we'll come back a few months later and dig up a little bit and see how it turns out as a paint.
Whoa. Like so yeah, can you reverse engineer the color that you see?
Well, no, I just go and collect it.
Right. And then
Yeah,
just
just out of the
yeah,
ground.
just duplicate it. Yeah.
Because on the side of the highways, there'll often be like the rock cut. They'll cut out the side of the hillside there, and there'll be all this exposed earth on the side of a highway kind of thing.
Hmm.
I don't know if you get much of that around Colorman.
Yeah, Colorado.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you often get lots of big sort of veins of different colored ochres in there, and sometimes it can be really striking, especially after it's just been raining. You can really see everything vividly.
I love it.
Um,
Yeah, when it's pungent. That's what I miss about Portland. It's like every color popped because of the moisture.
yeah. So yeah,
That's
I've been sort of developing ranges of colors, and I'm starting to play around with themes and ideas. So like I'm working on, because of all the work I've been doing with copper, I want to make a Venus themed set,
cool.
and because and I'll do a Mars themed set as well, and things like that. But it's mostly been out of necessity. The idea that because there are plenty of other boutique watercolor makers out there, but they don't make their own pigments. So
Right.
they can buy whatever pigment they want and make whatever colors they want. So they can have extremely large ranges of colors. And so it's it's this thing of having to, how do I put it? The internet has created this emulation model where if you want to be successful, you need to emulate the trends in order
Yeah.
to, like, and so there's this difficult mismatch between trying to stay fundamentally unique to
Mm.
what I want to do, but also being marketable.
Yeah,
And
that's the hardest alchemy I've yet to find.
I had this real moment where my partner finished building the website for us, and Google has an analytical tool where it analyzes the language of your website. And it returned a result saying that the average language in my website would require a college degree to read.
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
too passive.
So they have that for With the Hollowed. We use a
Yeah.
WordPress engine, and the
Yeah.
SEO does that. It's like
Yeah.
readability, frowny face. And it says,
Yeah. And I
two
was just like, I was like, what? So you're saying I'm too passive, so I'm not aggressively marketing enough,
right.
and my language is too intellectual. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
so be
So
stupider
stop
and
being
louder.
you. Yeah, stop
Yeah.
being you. But maybe you could talk about too what you're offering now, because Mary also had another good question. It's like people want to know if they're powder or are they mixed already. So like explain what these are.
So initially, I'm just making watercolor pans, which
Okay.
got some somewhere. Yeah, that's not a very good example. But anyway, I shoot tons around, but never anything when you need it.
I
Here
love
we
it. The Alchemist shop.
go. So that's a pan of Madder Lake.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a little crimson red. So
Yeah.
that comes in like I don't know if you've used watercolors, but you essentially, they sort of dry as a little hard block that you
Mm-hmm.
can re-wet and then paint out, which is, how long have they been around? Since the 19th century, I think that
Mm-hmm.
style of watercolors. So it's just mixing it with a binder of gum arabic and honey and glycerin
Wow.
with the pigment. And
And
so
you have
that's the,
you said a plate, so like or a palette, I mean. It's like
it's
you
in
have
a little pan.
oh,
It's a,
okay. So they're separate, because I
yeah.
see them beautifully wrapped, and I always wondered, on your website, like you have that beautiful wrapping, and they look maybe bigger than they are.
Mm, they're quite small.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
that will go a really long way for a painter. So
Right.
that, depending on how heavy you use it, it yeah, it will last a fairly long time. But they're a challenge in themselves because, and again, this is where what I'm doing differs from, say, mainstream watercolors that you would buy, is because I'm not adding any sort of synthetic stabilizers. Each
Okay.
pigment requires a different kind of binder. Some, if you got to tweak them slightly, because sometimes a pigment is very absorbent and absorbs lots of moisture and just won't ever dry. Other times it just dries to a brittle mess and falls apart. And so it's like every single one, I have to formulate a new recipe to try and get it just to stabilize enough that it's a usable product. And that then means that the paint you're working with also has different qualities and characteristics.
That's so
Um,
cool. I love that.
and so I've been building up that range of colors, and then eventually I'd like to start selling powdered pigments to people. Um,
Yeah. And so they would need to, so they'd have to kind of by their own volition whether how they want to, what kind of paint style they want to use, but that pigment would be the basis
yes,
for all of it. Yeah.
yes. So all paint is basically a pairing of pigment and binder, and it's just the type of binder.
Mm-hmm.
So oil paints, you're using linseed or poppy seed oil. Egg tempera, which is probably my favorite painting style, is egg yolk, water,
Mm-hmm.
and pigment, which is what all of your classical Eastern European iconography is done in. Um, and then acrylic is using a polymer plastic acrylic. binder as its binding agent,
Very
which
cool.
I've never gelled well with acrylic. Something about it doesn't work for me.
Oh, so Oswald asked too, is the guest influenced by John Michael Greer? Which I'm not sure if you know. Yeah, modern
I know
occultist.
the name. I've
Yeah.
heard you talk about it, but no, I am. This is an interesting thing for me heading down this path. Like I grew up exposed to a lot of like my mum was very much into astrology and we did little spells and rituals and things as a kid and
Uh-huh.
I remember writing things down, shoving them in shells and sealing them with wax and
I love it.
doing
Yeah.
things like that. But I've always found myself in both camps. I like the camp of the esoteric and I like the traditionally scientific camp.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always approached things with a sense of analytical scientific method as well as enjoying the imagination that is generated from those things.
Right. And that's, I kind of wanted to be clear with that. I think it's like obvious why I call the channel PRAGMAGICK, because I'm a bit, I hear out the woo,
Yep.
I believe people believe themselves a lot of the time. And whether I believe them or not is inconsequential, or whether it's real or not is kind of inconsequential, because I think there is an inner, working and a path that everyone kind of travels on to figure themselves out and to better themselves and to be more in touch with this, like I was saying earlier, the psychical resonance or whatever it is, you know the collective unconscious, for young or whatever. But I want to be very practical in my application of such things. Like, I don't want to get lost in the purveyance of, like, I'm every day I change my mind, I'll just put it that way. I
Yep.
change my mind every day, whether it's, I'm communing with other spirits, or it's just a higher self, or, blah, 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 blah. Like, and we can go down this road, until the sun comes up. But the thing I love about you and your work is that it's very, practical, but it's magical in the same, it's very pragmatic as well. And I think you feel that too. I think you come from both those camps of, there is a scientific mind about, what I'm understanding or what I'm trying of the other, quote unquote, right? Or, there's a personal alchemy, there's a transmutation, a trans like sublimation of, different routines and self and whatnot. And you creating these things, and we talked last year that you started that way and then kind of moved and passed through into this idea of just letting intuition kind of be your pilot.
Mm.
Have you felt, but you also see, and this is the fun part, and this is why I love this. You also parlayed it with something very pragmatic. Grown the business. So
Yes.
in a way, you've kind of excelled in both parallel, you know? And have you found a communion with those two avenues?
At the moment, there's still a disconnect
Yeah.
between the business and the passionate side of things.
Mhm.
Um, Also, like, there's been, and I think there's been a number of months this year where I just haven't got any work done because of just all of the
Just
stuff going on. It's just like,
turmoil. Yeah.
and it's really depressing when you put all of this work in, you release this new set, with these new colors, and you do a whole bunch of like posts about it, and then you get no sales. And you get
Yeah.
a sale for a week, and then another week goes by and you have no sales, and then a month goes by and you've made $100, and you're like, oh, why am I doing this?
Yeah, exactly. So what
uh,
is the discipline, the growth you found to kind of counter that?
the fear of going back to hospitality.
Straight up. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Just got to keep doing it because it's just You just
It's
turn
you.
up every
Yeah.
day and you do it, whatever you can manage that day, and it sure as hell beats doing anything else. The fact that
So
I'm
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
just the fact that I'm even able to attempt to do something I really love is something worth pursuing as hard as possible.
Yeah. So there's an essence of gratitude that motivates.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Also, I've been working a lot with this idea of divergent magic, which is like brain chemistry as the other,
Okay.
like utilizing, routine in certain ways as like a long form magical ritual every day to kind of, you know, make offerings to the other, which is brain chemistry. Just like, it's like a mental health thing. And I wonder, like, when you were talking about, yeah, there were months, there's this huge blanket of everyone feeling this turmoil or repression. You know, I've went through some shit. I've lost, you know, uh, jobs and security and, things that kept me kind of afloat and able to maintain a motivation. Like, do you find that there is a routine or an essence of ritual in a day that keeps you above?
Hard to say. I think I'm still working that one out.
Yeah, me too.
Um,
That's why I ask.
I know I had this big reaction a couple of months ago at the height of all sorts of different things because we were in, yeah, as I said, massive lockdown where, because I got Melbourne is the city we're closest to where I used to live. That, and I'm in now regional Victoria, so I'm about an hour and a half or an hour's drive from the city.
Mhm.
They put this wall between, not literal wall, but a wall of police between the country and the city, and you weren't allowed to pass between. And we had nightly curfews, like
Mhm.
all this crazy stuff. And it was just all of this stuff going on. And I just got to the point where I was like, everything I'm seeing on the internet all day is so unreal. Like it's so far from what reality actually is. And everybody's opinions, whether you're this thing or that thing, and whether you believe that thing's going on or that thing, it's just like
Right.
this insanity meshing together that I was just like, enough. And got I went outside and I started building myself a charcoal powered blacksmithing forge
I love it. Yeah.
because I was like, I need to get back to doing something that is in a literal sense real. And so I started um, heating up metal and hammering it and digging in the garden and getting back in here and making pigments. And when I made that conscious decision to try and spend more time entertaining and grappling with what was actually tangibly real, it definitely started to help in terms of feeling a little bit more centered. Because when you're in the digital sphere, you just, it's chaos. It's a maelstrom.
Yeah, I guess too, especially when you're parlaying what you love to do in the process into the hopes of creating, a semblance of financial security or, whatever it may be. Yeah, like it swarms my brain every day. I still don't know how to tackle it, but yet I still have to yeah, get myself out of the house, Uh I don't know. Like I need to return to the earth more. So I absolutely agree
Yeah,
what you're talking about. Because I
blacksmithing's a
love
good
that. We
way.
talk about that all the time. Mary's a incredible gardener. No, now winter's coming, so there goes that. But
Get a greenhouse. There's a
yeah,
lot
we'll
you can
get.
do a
Hey,
greenhouse.
I'll build a greenhouse. Hell,
Yeah.
yeah. We were just talking. It's like, it's funny too in the constellation of these conversations that I have with people such as yourself through, the 54 episodes of PRAGMAGICK or whatever. Like I can hear the evolution or de-evolution of, what I think I should do, what I need to do. And it's pretty obvious what the continual conceptual idea of like how to better oneself is. And it's like it has more to do with nature and less to do with digital, you know?
it's a difficult one.
Yeah.
I think in reference to some earlier stuff you were saying about how to make the business work and that sort of stuff. Part of what I'm learning is patience and
Yeah.
building connections with people.
Oh,
Um,
relationships mean so much. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, just
Like
in
I was,
general. Yeah.
but in terms of relationship between the real and the digital, um, I feel like we might just be at this point where we're not psychologically prepared for the digital.
Yeah. Or
Um,
like I still hope to whip it into something where I'm not so chastised by it, all the time. Like there's
yeah.
got to be a way to, to measure it or utilize it like a tool, right? Instead of God, like, yeah,
Well, that was my
let it
big
eat you.
that was my big thing recently was realizing that the internet is a tool, not a place.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
we often see it as a place that we spend time, not
Right.
a tool to achieve a task.
I used to think, information, like I'm obsessed with information as you are too. We talked about this a lot. Um, and the fact that like I could have any text in my fingertips or like any slice of life from any part of the world at any time, like is an addiction in and of itself.
Well, it's a false economy in the sense that you can have limitless information with the internet, but there is a confining factor, which is you only have X amount of attention.
Right. And they're mining it. Yeah.
Exactly. And they are actively seeking your attention. And
Uh-huh.
so the double-edged sword with the internet is yes, you have access to everything. Will you use it to find the most useful thing? Probably not.
Right. Yeah. So Oswald had a funny question in the chat. We actually talked a lot about this last time we chatted. He asks a bit of an oddball question, but are the alchemy slash art scene in Europe as pressured by intersectionality as they are in North America?
I can't speak on Europe. I can only
I know.
speak on
He
Australia.
goes, oh, he goes, so snap. He's in Australia.
Yeah.
But we talked about this before, and we touched about it a little bit tonight about academia and postmodernism. And yeah, please.
Traditional art schooling in Australia is entirely, well, not entirely. I'm not being generous to it, but yeah, there's a fairly strong sense of postmodernism and the art scene here in Melbourne in particular. Like Melbourne is one of the more artsy cities, or at least it has the arrogant reputation of being one of the more artsy cities in Australia. It's very cliquey. It's very much full of politics and different theories and all of that sort of stuff. And that most of that stuff exhausts me at the moment. Um,
Yeah.
so
It exhausted you when we last chat earlier this
yeah,
year. But that was also at the precipice. I think everyone was feeling there was a huge kind of incorrigible divide within academia about such things. And I don't know what it's like now. I haven't been in it. I don't think yeah, you haven't been in it for the past year or so, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a hard one to swallow. And like
yeah, and
yeah,
I'm I don't know. I know the validity of the academic world is necessary to some degree, and then other times it's just they're just blowing smoke up their own asses, pretty
yeah.
much. And that's just I think it's always been like that though. It's just sometimes it gets noisier.
Well, we talk about this too, and there's a tutelage, right, of art, and a lot of people argue. I mean, this is the whole postmodernist take is that yeah, everything is art or whatever, or you know, to which I disagree, and a lot of people in the chat do as well, which is really funny.
Yeah.
Um, but there is a like a tutelage of self as a creator that you may not be heard, you may not be seen, but you take it seriously enough to consider all the facets and the elementals of creating something. I think you should be considered an artist, not like I'm saying the royal you, you
Yeah. Yeah.
know, the royal you of the people that really take every elemental challenge into creating something, and that are, the medium is almost the message in
I
that
think we've
sense.
lost a bit of mentorship in our society.
Yeah.
We don't know how to develop good mentors and good, like art school feels like a factory.
Oh yeah, I was
University
there.
feels like a factory to get jobs.
I hated
Um,
it. It was basically a picking pool for, yeah, film studio work. It was,
yeah.
yeah.
And so genuine inheriting of information and skills and mentorship is definitely of a less emphasis these days. And I think that's made us deficient in some way and makes us easier to be victims of marketing and dividing and divisive politics and stuff like that because we don't have this strong center.
Yeah.
Um,
But that's also not to dismay that, it doesn't take archaic text to maketh the artist, or it doesn't take,
that's not what I'm
yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
I think I'm more saying like healthy places in which to allow people to be fostered and nurtured and develop their creative
Mm,
stuff and have the opportunity to learn the skills they want to learn and have people who have real expertise share that expertise.
yeah.
And like that's the beauty of YouTube is like
Trade schools.
trade schools, but even YouTube has become a great learning platform. If I want to learn something, I can just go and watch, 50 hours of somebody on YouTube blacksmithing, and then I can start to figure it out. And it's like, so YouTube has this beautiful ability to be a mentor and all these people putting stuff up on there. And that's partly why I ended up being compelled to share what I do because I went on YouTube to look up pigment making because I was interested and there was nothing there.
Right. Yeah.
Nothing at all.
A lot of friends tell me that too. I have a lot of different creators that say, "Hey, I went to look for this on YouTube and they had nothing, so I started making YouTube videos." It's like why I did it with audiomancy.
Mm,
It's why Lord Josh Allen, my friend, did it with Lamat, and Taoism, uh Taoist magic or whatever. These very like
yeah.
niche kind of ideas, but at the same time, like I love that gene pool of YouTube. That, yeah, here we are. We're the kind of the creators on the outskirts or on the fringes that are, probably pushing forward for people to understand very interesting and fun concepts that you don't need to spend $30,000 a year to get.
Yeah. And then but then YouTube has again its double-edged sword of like, like I did a video on how to make your own watercolor binder not too long ago because it was my attempt to sort of branch out and get something that's a little bit more marketable video that can get a bit more traction because it's one thing to like say, here's how you make and synthesize some crazy old pigment, whereas everybody wants to know how to make a watercolor binder. You go on, you look at the top hits on YouTube and they've got, 500,000 views and you watch it and you're like, from my point of view, you're like, this is all wrong.
Right.
Everything about what they're doing is wrong or very surface level and just pretty, nicely shot. And so for me, I'm then stuck in this conundrum of like, do I make the pretty surface video with the catchy title that's going to get 500,000 views? Or do I make the thing that's actually genuinely in depth and sharing as much of my knowledge as I can?
Yeah.
And I opted for doing that while trying to make it pretty and
Of
marketable.
course you did. I mean, of course you did, you know?
But it's been
Like,
really, really,
because like but I'm saying just as a person, I trust you. Like, of course you made that choice, you know.
Yeah.
But
But
I was talking to Mary today. I was watching some live stream tonight, and it's like in this conspiratorial, realm of, taking down charlatans and stuff. And they were talking about the charlatans, and like ascension courses they're doing for fucking fake everything. And I'm like, I'm in the wrong business, Mary. Maybe we should just change our entire thing.
well,
Maybe we should stop being true to ourselves and just try to make money.
isn't
Yeah.
that what L. Ron Hubbard said? Like, best way to
Yeah,
make money is to
exactly.
start a religion.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny to that too. The people that do the channels of that drama get a lot of views too. So like
Yeah.
it's kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy of this like Ouroboros of,
Yeah.
you know, snake eating its tail in that sense. But we shall persevere.
We shall. It's always the challenge.
So Sixth Sense asks, is there something you wish to further yourself in the field of alchemy, or something you always wanted to do that you have not met? It's a good question. This is a double question. Sneaky question.
Something that I've always wanted to do.
Yeah, kind of like what's the next not plateau, because that means
Yeah.
false level, but the next stage.
Again, it ends up being a practical one, but again, it has an element of, there's a symbolic element to it too, which is, so I've started, so with this particular paint here, the madder root. So it comes from a root of a plant that I get from Iran, and so I've just planted some seeds for that, and I'm growing up my own seedlings, and they'll take about 2 to 3 years before they're ready to harvest to make color. And for me, I'm obsessed with being a from the rawest possible materials kind of person. So I really want to be able to make a paint from seed to earth to harvesting roots to making the pigment to making the paint. I
Oh,
just think
nice.
like over a 2 to 3 year period, just the rewarding nature of watching that entire process unfold. Like one of my other main obsessions is one day I want to make steel from the earth. I want to
Oh,
do,
cool.
like, I really want to smelt my own steel from iron ore and then turn that into something. I don't know what it does. It's irrelevant what I make in the end. The idea of being that primitive, because, and that's partly why I was drawn back to blacksmithing, which has been
Mhm.
my relaxation.
Is the next stage after blacksmithing? Is it like, well, you already kind of do a herbology in a
Yeah,
way. So
I
like,
do that too, and that was before I got into all of this alchemical stuff. I was very, very into entheogenic plant cultivating.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
We talked about
and on
that.
a very deep level too, of like, and it was almost like a pre-alchemy for me. My interest into growing plants and stuff like that, because I got really into like micro, like organic microbiology stuff, looking at the interactions between fungi and the soil and bacteria, and
Mm-hmm.
taking a very scientific approach, but also an extremely holistic, biodynamic, organic, no-till gardening approach too. Um, and so I like these, like, I think it's a obsession with first principles. So it's like, if I want a blacksmith, I want to make my own steel. How do I make my own steel? I need to get earth and I need to smelt the earth into steel.
Right.
I want to make a pigment. I need a root. I want to grow a seed to get the root. It's like I want to go as back to the original principles as I can.
I love that. So I guess that is the natural progression. What is after like iron work?
I don't know if there is. I think it's a
Right.
never-ending regression.
Right. But right. Yeah, you go back. I guess yeah, and then I'm trying to think. I was like, maybe it is pharmacology. No, it's kidding.
Oh, yeah,
it's
that's always
it's yeah.
there in the back of my mind. Um,
Yeah. I've had a lot of friends that thought they were, and it never turned out well. So be wary.
You,
But they also weren't artists or actual like chemists or alchemists, you know. So, you know, who knows?
oh, that side of things I'm not worried about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I got really into this idea of realizing that, so like we're talking now through the magic of the internet.
Mm.
That was only made possible because of this never-ending lineage of refinement. So at some point, X number of thousands of years ago, somebody managed to get a fire hot enough that turned iron ore into metal, which allowed them to turn that iron into a hammer, which allowed them to hammer a finer tool, which
Mm-hmm.
allowed them to create a more and more finer tool to the point where we could make a silicon transistor and a microchip. And but all of those microchips and smartphones are entirely dependent on the fact that at some point somebody was just smashing blunt objects against each other.
Right. To sharpen. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
and
even
that's how
just,
we got
yeah,
here.
just to flatten. Well, it's funny too to have you work parallel in the like progression of digital, uh sales and entrepreneurship, whilst dropping back or
Mm,
regressing in the other. And I think that's kind of the only way to do it. It makes perfect sense to me. Like that's how you marriage the two. Because yeah, if you're like me right now, where you don't really have the space right now because of COVID and everything to, record loud music or do live things, you're pretty much on the computer. And like,
yeah,
if you're not having the percussive elements or, hitting or, strumming things loud or belting your life out into the heavens, like it's really just through this tiny window we have in front of us. And
yeah.
like if it's all based in that, then that doesn't really,
You
it
don't
doesn't
have
really
a
soothe parts that need to be soothed.
you're lacking the gravity of something real.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And that's why I get you when you're talking about just hammering, you know,
mm.
just
Well, my
and
partner got me a axe for my birthday.
nice.
Really beautiful German small hand hatchet with Damascus steel. And just going out and axing stuff is great.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like it's a shame that I can't, wear this thing around with me all the time because it would be a bit weird. But
Oh, what it? I don't know. I guess you don't
yeah,
live in America. I guess that
yeah,
wouldn't.
that's true. Yeah. Um, but just the simple basic actions of making things and making things from raw materials is always going to be deeply satisfying to me.
I
And
love
while
it.
there's always going to be this struggle between like taking that deep satisfaction and then turning it into a marketing campaign in order to bring people into the story of your work to sell products,
Right.
it's always going to be tough. But
Well, and I think that's what I wanted to glean from you. I told my partner about talking with you tonight. I was like, yeah, but there's, I really look up to Jeremy, and especially being, you know, like to see the purview of when you started this and like you're being able to, you know, put it into that alchemized, entrepreneurship. I was like, that's, because that's something I'm struggling with. That's I'm sure something everyone's struggling with in these times. And so, to hear that makes absolute sense to me. That we need to kind of reconfigure, I think, our modes of what we're considering tools. Yeah.
yeah, and I think, one other thing I'm like majorly working for at the moment is I want to start teaching in-person classes on how to, you know,
Oh, I'd love to
make
do that.
and as we, and this is a future idea because obviously the world's in a difficult spot for moving around and doing those things. But again, it's like making paints is all well and good. And, I'll keep doing that because I like making paints. But it's not what I ultimately want to end up doing.
Right.
And
Oh,
so
so what is it then that you want to ultimately end up doing? Sorry, you don't have to say.
no,
It can
I
be a
think
personal pursuit, you know?
no, it's a case of making sure the history of these things doesn't get lost
Yeah.
and
And
it gets
saying
taught
it out. Yeah.
and it
Saying
gets
it out.
taught to other people.
Yeah.
And if I can make a living off one exploring and trying to look, because part of the problem with a lot of these things is there isn't anyone who knows how to do it anymore.
That's true. You're the only one I
Um,
know.
like one of the copper blues that I'm making at the moment, the last video I put up on Blue Vertita, I know I know there's a guy here in Melbourne that I work with, um, and he knows the last person alive in England who knows how to make this blue pigment and knows all of the secrets of it and all this sort of stuff. And so outside of that one guy in England who's quite old and literally the only way you can contact him is through fax machine or telephone,
I love it. Yeah.
he's the last person that knows how to make blue vertita properly. So when he goes, it's gone. And that's why I'm desperately trying to learn as much as I can about it. And so ultimately, it would be really nice to be able to travel around, hold workshops, teach people how they can make their own art materials, because the other main goal is to help artists get a deeper relationship to their materials. I think if
Yes.
they can understand where their colors come from, why they are that way, and what properties and behaviors and characteristics they have, I think it'll be beneficial to helping counteract some of uh, the hot air from postmodernism.
I love it. So you have an educational streak in you, and I think that's what's sorely missed. You know, we came out in Colorado to start a program for outdoor education, and you're talking about blacksmithing, you know, working with that program, they did blacksmithing. Like it
Yeah,
was all nature based. Love it very dearly, but like there is a sure sorry lack of, you know, we taught kids this summer, brought them out to the wilderness, told them how to throw knives, shoot arrows, and make fires out of nothing, you know, and
yeah.
they couldn't wait to get to the iPad. And I'm like, yeah, well, this is I kind of share in that, like there needs to be more of that temperance, that like, you know, passionate patience when it comes to being educational, you know,
And there
or
isn't,
an educated, like someone being educated. You need a temperance. You need a passion, patience.
time. Yeah, time is a big factor in both learning and doing that. I think.
She's laughing in the background.
Yeah,
Patience.
patience.
Yeah. But so I asked our lovely chat, who I want to say hey and thank you for showing up. Pretty sure I gave wrenches to all the ones I like. Just kidding. If you don't have one, I should probably give wrenches to all those too. I like all of you. Uh, Robin, Bunya, blah 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 blah. So I asked them for questions, and uh, they keep pounding it. It's great. Has he made pigment from woad?
Ah, I was just checking. Um,
That's from Navier.
I actually just picked a tiny piece of woad from my garden to see how it's coming along. So that's one of my summer projects is I'm growing a field of woad at the moment, or at least trying to. We're only just getting out of winter and I have to deal with the frost first. But as the weather warms up, so hopefully mid-March, I'll be able to make some woad-based pigments, which is really exciting because um, I started playing around with indigo, and woad's just an extension of indigo. It's the European variant, um, which I think will be an interesting endeavor, given that somewhere in my family history, one of my um, on my grandparents, on my mum's grandparents' side, one of my ancestors was an indigo farmer in India.
Oh my god, like the actual
Yep.
indigo? Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Back in the 1800s or something like that would have been. They had a big
I mean,
indigo
talk about the
farm.
coolest colors. That's probably the best one.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to picking up that, I guess, familial heritage of indigo farming.
Are you kidding? I had no idea it was like in your
Yeah,
blood as a color man. That's
yeah.
funny. That's really cool. So yeah, you're working with woad.
Yes. Look forward to trying that out. So I think part of the process is you pick the leaves and you roll them into little balls. You make woad balls and you let them sit and ferment and they go blue. And then you extract out all of the indigo color from them. But that's about as much as I know.
That's I'm so excited for this because like I said, indigo to me is it's supreme.
Yeah.
That's the choice color. You
Has a
know,
really
if you thought
weird,
purple was regal, ooh, wait till you get psychical with indigo.
yeah.
Here
It's
it
got a
comes.
really weird smell.
Of course
Yeah.
it does.
Indigo has a strange smell. I kind of like it, but it's kind of gross. Yeah.
That's the best reaction. That sounds like indigo to me. I
Yeah.
like things that are kind of gross. All right.
Yeah.
Um, that's awesome. So you're working with mode. Can these pigments be safely used in face and or body ritual for for performance purposes?
Some yes, some no. Um,
Fair enough.
yeah.
Moving
So
on.
anything that has cobalt or
Cobalt's not good.
cadmium,
No.
no, cobalt's
Oh,
not good. I
because that's
wouldn't.
right. Cobalt's using like very toxic. Was it
Heavy metals.
heavy metals? That's what I meant
Yeah.
to say. Yeah.
Which I love. I love the heavy metal pigments.
Are you
They're the
kidding?
best.
Cobalt's like the best pigment.
Yeah.
I love it.
Cobalt's incredible. Cadmium is incredible. I
Cadmium's
don't
good.
sell any lead because there's too much logistics in that. But if I could, I would, because lead is incredible.
Right.
Mercury is incredible. But yeah, some of the pigments can be. So anything that's derived from plants is usually pretty safe. So the madder, I made a pigment from pomegranates. Um,
Really? I find it so hard to like to drain color from a pomegranate. It's so
oh, well, it's
muted.
yellow. It's from the skin, not the
Yeah.
fruit.
Okay. Really?
Yeah.
A yellow pomegranate.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Persephone.
Yeah. Earth tones. You can use all the ochres on your skin and all that sort of stuff. That's very acceptable. But yeah, you have to be careful with pigments, especially if you just even like buying them out and about, because I see a lot of people asking this question, can I use it on my body? Or great, I'm gonna make this thing and use it as eyeshadow. And you're like,
It's a
no, no, no,
great
no, no,
question.
don't do that.
No,
Don't
you
do that.
don't. Okay, so
Yeah.
you don't with certain, but there's others that you can.
Yeah. There are others that you can. And again, this is the problem with modern societies. People don't know what they should or shouldn't respect in how toxic it is. So there's this disconnect between people's understanding of whether or not a chemical is safe or not for them.
Do you think like with the lead that you were working with that comes from a long term of, because we were talking that lead, yeah, it was the base standard for many years, lead paint.
Yes, yes,
And
and
then yeah, so like does that take like a lifetime of being around?
Your main problem with lead paint is exposure to dust. So with all of these things, it's a respiratory thing. It's the quickest way to get into your system. You just have to be careful of that. Like if you have lead white oil paint and you squeeze it out of the tube and you paint with it and you don't go there sitting there eating it, you'll be fine.
Don't sniff.
Yeah.
Don't sniff the pigments.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just don't sniff the pigments. All right. So, Sixth Sense asked, "What is the biggest or hardest achievement in alchemy you think you have accomplished? Maybe one you are most proud of or taught you the most."
It would be my matter pigments. I don't know if I have any of them around. This pink pigment here, which comes from, oh, I've got it here. So this is the matter root. I don't know if it's going to focus well enough on this there, but it's really fickle working with like plants. Plants are so much more unpredictable than metals, which makes sense. Metals are rigid and solid and stuff like that. And so I've probably done, 20 or 30 different batches of making matter pigment. And it bewildered me at the beginning. But over time, I've gotten to this point where I'm really comfortable and producing something that I'm really, really happy with, like this really rich result. And I really feel like I know and understand the matter root. Again, it has different smells when I'm working with it. It has, different qualities. And like for a while, one of the issues I had was when I was making the actual pigment, I was having these explosions of foam, this pink froth and foam out everywhere. And I was like, I can't scale this up. It's getting too much. Like it's crazy. Like everything I'm working with is safe and not toxic, but it was just going everywhere. And I was making, I would have these sessions where I would make matter pigment and just everything would be splattered with stuff. And I would have just made every bench top and messed up every possible thing I could. And it just junk everywhere. And it was really fun being that viscerally into the experience. But as time's gone on,
Jackson Pollock.
Yeah, but as time's gone on, I've really become to know and love the matter pigment and the process. And I'm at a point where at the beginning, I felt like I was in imposter syndrome, where I was like, I've read what I'm supposed to do and it's working, but I can't necessarily call this like masterful quality stuff. But after a year of solidly doing this a lot, I really feel like this is the one pigment I've kind of really mastered.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Are you able send me that? I'm going to put that in the link. At least that, transmutation, because I love that. Like your favorite pigment is usually always the best. I think before when we were talking, it was a yellow and it was so good. I forget which yellow it was.
Yeah, yellows.
Yeah, it's like one of the early yellows you did, and it was so vibrant. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, that would have been cadmium yellow.
Cadmium, yeah.
Yeah.
So poisonous.
When it's in the form of the cadmium pigment, it's okay.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's the process leading up to it that's not okay. Which is always a fun one, and fun in a classical alchemy sense too, because it has the potential to produce hydrogen sulfide gas, which is your classic rotten egg thing, which it's a good one.
Funny smell.
Yeah. We all know that smell, and the human nose is acutely designed to detect it. So you can detect it in like parts per billion when it's way below the threshold of harming you.
Don't they put that scent in gasoline or petrol?
Yes. Yeah, to help you know it's there.
To help you know it's there. Yeah.
Yeah. And
otherwise,
the danger
scentless.
with the danger with it is if you can smell it and then the smell gets stronger and then suddenly you can't smell it anymore, that's when you're in the bad spot, because it eventually makes your sense of smell turn off when it
Oh,
gets to the level where you're about to get in trouble.
I kind of love that.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like
really
it's like
cool.
that ant that puts the bacteria in the insect's brain and takes over
Yeah.
'em. Yeah.
So whenever I'm working with making the cadmium yellow, not that there is that much risk of producing it, but as I'm starting to make it, I'm like, all right, there's the rotten egg smell, and then I get obsessed with making sure my sense of smell is still there. So I might just be smelling, like I'll go grab a piece of lavender or something and be like,
Well,
oh no, I can still smell, I'm still safe.
and that's prescient too, because wasn't one of the COVID symptoms loss of smell?
Yeah, it might have. Yeah, I think it was
Yeah, I think
supposedly.
it was here, but it seems like you guys treated it a bit uh tougher than we got it. To put it
Yeah,
lightly. Yeah.
yes,
A bit tougher. Yeah, you were
a little
talking
bit
about
tougher.
yeah, total lockdown. We're probably moving towards it. We have the worst numbers that we've ever had. So, we'll see. But
I think you guys are in for a complex time.
yeah, I think so too. And you know, it's fine. I know from the first quarantine to do something different this time, you know. I
Yep.
did not treat that first quarantine well. I let stress kind of impede me, and I was just a mess. We'll just put it
Yeah.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I'm glad I got out to the countryside. It's just been so much nicer to
I'm
be.
so excited to get out of the city. Holy
Yeah.
shit. Yeah. That's all we want. We talk
What
about it
city are
all the
you in
time.
now?
We're in Denver.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is that a
So like
big
the
city?
biggest. Yeah. It's the
Yep.
biggest in Colorado. So we're like city proper, not to dox myself or anything, but we it's very city. It's very city. But it's also very like weird Tim Burton-esque, you know,
Yep.
Victorian home, different colors of pastels, like
Yep.
very, very strange and very, very neat. But we weren't able. I was working with a venue, and my first show that I booked was March 13th of last year. So that day they knew they were going to announce it, COVID as a national emergency.
Yep.
So everyone decided, or a lot of people decided not to show up, and then the bar had to shut down for 3 months. So it was like, all right,
Yep.
yeah, that's where we're at.
It
But I
is.
did want to ask. So Mary asked about henna and about that being. Let me see if I can find that question. Um, I don't know if I can. I remember there's a henna question and what kind of that does to your skin. What?
I think it's probably okay.
Right, it's just got a marker.
Well, henna's a dye, not a pigment.
A
So
dye. Okay,
yeah,
cool. There you go.
there is a fundamental difference between the two. There's usually a slight overlap, but it'll
Does
be a
henna
dye.
fit into the alchemical arts? She was asking. So it's a dye. So yeah.
Yeah, I've never played around with it apart from when I was younger.
Yeah.
Um, but no,
I
I
need
don't.
it because I've been doing, I talk about how I write my shit with
Yeah,
Sharpie.
you with your
I
Sharpie. Yeah, that's not good for you.
that's not good. I
I've
should
been
use
still
henna.
thinking
Yeah.
about. I think maybe what I could do for you is make you some sort of indigo dye that
I
you could
would
use.
love that. Are you
Yeah,
kidding?
because
I
that
would
would be
celebrate
safe.
that so hard.
Yeah,
Yeah. If it not only is it safe, it just is like my color. God, I
yeah,
love that color.
yeah. So we
But
could work
anyways,
on that.
oh, I mean, no rush. I get you. You're a busy man. But also Sixth Sense says, do any reactions in parentheticals when making the pigments get hot or cold, and are these true transmutations?
Yes, things get hot.
Mhm.
And temperature plays a big role in a lot of what I do. So like the blue copper pigments that I've been making, I'll show you. So these two here,
Ah,
so they're both exactly the same chemical. They're both copper carbonate, but the blue one has to be produced at less than 11 degrees Celsius. So I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, maybe like 20.
11. So like 30 is about 80, I think.
Yes, so
Yeah.
a third of that.
Yeah.
And so it'll only be produced at a slow, you need like 4 or 5 days of slow reaction between the copper and the chalk
Mm-hmm.
to make the copper carbonate and to make it blue. If I do the same reaction at boiling temperature, you get this color. So the
I
difference
love it.
between so this one is done cold over the course of many, many days or weeks. This is done instantaneously boiling, but they're the same thing. But they have radically different colors
Crazy.
because of how they're made and where they're born.
One gets all powdery periwinkle. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's really, yeah. So temperature plays a big role and time of digestion and speed um, in the terms of what you end up with a final color.
I love it. Oh, 6 says 32 is 51 Fahrenheit. That doesn't make sense.
I don't
32
understand.
degrees Celsius is 51.8 degrees Fahrenheit.
Anyway,
Well, because you
I don't
said
know why. I don't know why the US still insists on using Fahrenheit.
listen, we
Yeah, we
drive
won't go down.
on the right side. Oh, sorry. That's the whole thing. It's like, why? Why do we insist?
No,
It makes no sense. The rest of the world doesn't. It makes no sense. I'm gonna learn the metric system. I swear. I'm gonna do it.
there's nothing to learn.
I know it's called the metric system.
There's
Like,
a 1 and there's a 0, and that's all there is.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm gonna ask the chat if there's any more questions. Please send them my way. Otherwise, like, let's talk about what's coming up. Let's let's talk because like I love seeing you. You said to me that you were gonna send me a little
I
like
am. I have a color
color
chart.
swatch. Yeah, I'm so excited for it. It didn't happen before we talked, but like you're working on big stuff. You're working on palettes. You're working on.
Yeah, what's coming up is mostly. So at the moment, my kiln is still stuck in Melbourne, and so I need to get that shipped out here so then I can get back to making pigments that require heat. Because a lot of pigments need calcination, and
You got like a full kiln.
yeah, I
Oh,
managed to find
nice.
one. Yeah, yeah, there was an old Greek guy who was using it for heat treating tools or something like that, selling it on Gumtree for like a couple $100, and I was like, I'm gonna grab this kiln.
Oh my god, that's
Um,
awesome.
so having and it's really nice going through the process of upgrading my fire essentially, which is, if you want to get back to classical alchemy, that's central to your work. Is, I
Right.
started with a gas forge as my first source of fire that could get up to 1,000+ degrees, and now I have this nice fancy temperature controlled kiln, which is a godsend in one way because I can just dial in. All right, I need it at 980 degrees for 2 hours, done. And
I
I don't have
love
to
it.
worry about whether or not I'm going to burn everything down or explode something with a gas forge by walking away.
Yeah.
So that's handy. So as soon as I get that back, there's this really beautiful manganese violet I want to make, this rich purple, and a bunch of different stuff to explore and make, and heaps of different videos in the works and stuff like that. But I'd really like to get to this point of being able to run classes, and it really depends on how next year plays out with, you know, distancing and stuff. Because like one of the interesting things from the YouTube channel and Instagram is I've been growing a following of people in Iran.
Oh, cool.
There's some really cool artists in Iran.
I
A
love
lot
it.
of women who are really into making their own paints from local materials. So because they have this history of making dyes and paints in Iran, and
That's
so
so cool.
there's all these women who do these incredibly psychedelic geometric pattern paintings from stuff they have made themselves, only colors that they make themselves, and I get heaps of emails and questions from them. And so I'd really love to travel to Iran and teach some classes or something like that and learn what they have to teach me in return, and all this sort of stuff, and like to come out to the US and see the incredible geology that you guys have there. Like,
It's irreplaceable. Like
yeah.
there's nothing like it. But at the same time, we are dying to see Australia. And I
Oh yeah.
love that you moved into the country. That's so cool. And it's not like the bush, right? You said it was the mountains.
We're elevated up a little bit, but
Yeah.
like when I say country, it's like I'm out of the Melbourne and I can see rolling hillsides and the forest is just down the road. But I'm also 200 meters away from the fish and chip shop and the supermarket.
I love it. Yeah.
And there's a donut van that rocks up on Fridays on my
We're just
street. So I'm like, it's everything I could want.
we're dying to get out of the city. I
Yeah.
love that. It sounds so good. Um, and thank you, Six Sense, for posting Jeremy's Alchemical Arts
Oh
YouTube
yeah, thank you.
in the chat. That's very cool. Um, it's always a pleasure, man. It's so good to catch up with you. It
Yeah,
really
it's
is.
so good. And I'd really like to, and I think we talked about this last time. One day we should do some collaborating stuff, because I'm really always enjoying the output of music that you've been doing. Like I've listened to your last album to death. Like,
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
yeah, I
Yeah.
constantly give it a whirl. It's good walking music.
Yeah.
Like when
Yeah.
I'm walking home from a friend's place late at night, might have smoked a little bit here and there, put on the headphones and just walk. That album gets you home. Like I've always got this option of, like, when I was living in the city, I had the option of, like, I could get an Uber and it cost like $7 to get home, or I
Mhm.
could whack on your album and walk for 40 minutes.
No way. I saved you
And
money.
well, I don't care about the money. I
I
actually
know.
care about the experience of walking.
That's
So I've really
that
enjoyed
means
that.
so much. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah, no, I'm always down. We're working on a new We the Hollowed audio sigil and stuff. If you had a track or anything that kind of purveys, what you do, send it to me. Well,
Well, I
let's
haven't done any music
keep
for
doing this.
years.
I know you said that.
I more mean like if I did some video work
Oh,
of
I'd
like
love it.
really close up stuff of pigment
Oh my
making.
god. Okay. I kind of so at the end of every liminal stream, I was doing a little audiomancy thing, right? Where I sequence with something else. So like I'll play a demo and then sequence it. So
Yep.
the unfortunate thing is that I played kind of the song that I played in the beginning, but I also have it kind of sequenced to a slowed down version of your Alchemical Arts like
Intro.
main intro. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be a cool way to like end it.
Well, that's
So
exactly what I was thinking.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Um if no one's got any more questions, you guys are the best. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Mary Navier, Six, Bunya, uh Godzilla, Oswald, uh so many people I can't even get back into up to who was all there. Stephen Ronan, off the top of my head. That's it. Um So yeah, so we'll play that song maybe, and I'll sequence it to you, and everyone has your link in the in the chat, and they'll see your beautiful animation for the intro. So it might not work, but let's try it.
Yes.
All right, Jeremy, always good, man.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Always, always. Yeah, keep in touch. Like, let's keep doing
Definitely
this.
will.
All
Yeah,
right,
no, we will.
all right, good.
And
You
hopefully I
better.
can get out to the US at some
I
point.
mean, straight up. Hopefully, we can leave the U.S. at some point.
Well, yeah, we legally can't leave Australia at the moment.
I don't think we can go anywhere. I don't think
Yep.
Australia would let us in.
No, they wouldn't.
No, they wouldn't. So here we are
Yep.
in quarantine. All
In
right,
the
man.
digital.
We're
All
gonna
right.
give this a try.
All right. Let's see
So
how it
good.
goes.
Thanks, man. Six says, have a good one. Thank you. Peace, Jeremy. Everyone
Thank
says
you.
goodbye.
Thanks to everyone.
Yeah, that was really sweet. All right. We'll see you soon.
See ya.
Haunt on. You can keep on running out for days, and you call anyway. We can overcome this carnal sea, backwards and crooked like you need. Unshouted, unsown, in the place I go. The Lord never knows in the town I have grown. Backwards and corner cobblestone. Just like a soldier, one dead wounded cop. I'll never soldier, I'll always be forgot. I don't know what I know. Bye, folks. On